Hi, I'm Sherry LaPena, and I'm reading from my first book, Things Go Flying. This passage is about growing up haunted. Harold thought he could remember being a happy kid once, but after his father died, at the breakfast table over his bacon and eggs, things had changed. There wasn't enough money, and his mother had been forced to take in boarders and to cook and clean all day. That was bad enough, but after a couple of years of this, when he was about 9 years old, his mother's gift had arrived, announcing itself that fateful night. Not long after, she began to make a little extra money as a medium. She let it be known through word of mouth that she was willing to contact the other side in her own home for those wishing to communicate with lost loved ones, and Harold's life had changed forever. His mother really could reach the dead. Harold had seen it with his own eyes. One evening, early in her new career, an older couple had come in. Her clients usually seemed to be older because, Harold assumed, they knew more dead people, and Harold, against his mother's orders, and in spite of his own timidity, had snuck down to the landing and tried to hear what was going on behind the closed double doors of the front room. He heard his mother's murmuring voice, and then she began to moan, and he had to see. He crept down the staircase and put his eye to the keyhole. The room was dark except for the flickering light of a single candle burning on the mantelpiece. The tall, narrow windows were heavily curtained in dark velvet, shutting out the light from the street. In the center of the room was a round mahogany table with 4 high-backed chairs around it. 3 of the chairs were occupied, and his mother was leaning slightly forward, reaching across the table and grasping one hand of the man and one hand of the woman on either side of her. The man and woman also held hands, so that the 3 of them created a circle. His mother's eyes were closed, and she was moaning as if in pain, while the other 2 stared at her. The woman looked eagerly expectant, fearfully hopeful. The man looked as if he were having second thoughts, especially as Harold's mother's moans became louder and her head began to roll around on her neck. The man leaned back in his chair as far as he could, as if to distance himself from the proceedings. Harold's mother's eyes began to flutter beneath her closed eyelids. It was a disturbing sight, and Harold almost turned and ran. But then his mother began to speak, and he found he couldn't move. Because it wasn't her own voice that came out of her mouth. It was the voice of a man in the prime of life, deep and confident, a trifle impatient, and it said, "What do you want, Ma?" The woman gasped, "It's him!" "I'm here too, Richard. It's your dad." "Hi, Dad," Harold heard the voice say out of his mother's mouth, and it was the strangest thing Harold had ever seen. "We want to know if you're okay," the mother said. "I'm all right, I guess." "We miss you terribly," said the mother, and she began to weep. "Don't cry, Mom. It never does any good." "But it was such a senseless accident. We're so angry about it." "I don't like it either, Ma, but what can I do?" "We're trying to do our best without you, son, but it's hard," the father said. There was an awkward silence, which the father tried even more awkwardly to fill. "You know Sandy's running around with some new guy." "Yeah, I know." "We could talk to her," the mother said. "Tell her it's not decent. You in your grave less than a year." "No, leave it be," the man's voice said irritably. The father said, as if eager to change the subject, "Do you by any chance remember what you did with the socket wrench? I've looked everywhere." "I loaned it to Tony." "Oh, he hasn't mentioned it." "Well, for sure he's got it. Ask him." "Okay, I will." "Do you ever see your grandma?" the woman asked. "I gotta go. You take it easy." Harold saw his mother's head shoot up. Her eyes opened, and she quickly let go of the hands she'd been holding. Harold had seen enough. He bolted back upstairs to his bedroom. He was simply too scared after this to ask questions. After that one time, he stayed steadfastly in his bedroom with the door closed, concentrating fiercely on the Hardy Boys or his comic books. At first, his mother had a client only every couple of months, so for much of the time, Harold could pretend that he was a normal boy with a normal mother, living a perfectly normal kind of life. It wasn't as though his mother dressed like a gypsy or used a crystal ball, but Harold could remember, at a fairly tender age, things flying around the room. He could remember having to duck, and as word got around, the bereaved and the curious beat a path to his mother's door. Harold found it more and more difficult to pretend that things were normal, that life in his house ran along the same lines as it did in everybody else's.